Dean of the University of Ghana Law School. We'll take a message from the Dean from the KNUST Law Faculty.
Your Ladyship, permit me to stand on the protocol which have been announced consistently not long ago. I bring warm felicitation from Dean of Law, KNUST, Professor Lydia Aporin-Kansa. We are excited that at this very important moment in legal education and legal practice, UPSA have actually provided an eloquent testimony that they've not just emerged on the scene to add to the proliferation of law faculties, but they bring something significantly innovative, which will advance legal education. And we want to commend you for this maiden platform, which you have created for engagement to be had between those who teach law, those who are learning law, and those who are direct beneficiaries of the knowledge and competencies which are acquired by those that go through legal education. But may I seize this opportunity to encourage our law students in the LLB program, much as there is that pressure on you to finish and become lawyers like people are enjoying the legal profession and making use of their knowledge. I would like to encourage you to also be very much interested in developing your critical thinking ability. In the LLB, it is important to have a solid grasp of the theoretical or the doctrinal law. We shouldn't rush to become practitioners. We can draw inspiration from what practitioners are doing, but let us take time, deploy our energies to build solid theoretical grasp of substantive law. And we also develop your critical thinking ability. You should be able to interrogate. You should be able to interrogate issues. Now, when you get to the professional legal education, it is more dogmatic in the sense that you are not going to change the law and the procedure. But whilst you are still in the LLB program, you have the luxury to develop the dexterity for critical thinking, interrogate concept, interrogate principles. And that is why academic freedom is very much encouraged and exercised in the universities. So my dear students, don't rush to become practitioners. Develop your academic grasp of the law first. And then when you cross to the law school, now you can now follow the conservative tradition of the legal profession, constant. So at that level, you can begin to concentrate more on that. But at this stage, be curious, be creative, and take advantage of all the opportunities for critical thinking, which LLB program presents to you. Now, finally, I would like to encourage the various law firms which have put up stands for the fair, and also those who are assisting UPSA to have this, that they should go a step further and institute prizes to encourage excellence in learning, so that at the end of semesters and academic year, maybe best student in law of contract, it will not be out of place, you have a prize by a particular law firm, best student in company law, and so on and so forth. That way, the industry is also encouraging the training of our law students before they will even qualify and be able to say that keep on doing great things, and we draw inspiration from some of these initiatives. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adapa. Thank you very much to everybody for staying with us. Please let's give a round of applause to ourselves. As mentioned, we are currently live on Joy TV. We're also being streamed live on all their YouTube channels. We've had the messages from our deans of the law faculties. We'll begin with the meat or the heart of the program, our legal profession conference, and we want to move into the panel discussion. As mentioned, the representative of the Chief Justice mentioned she may have to take leave of us. So if you can kindly rise to our feet. Thank you very much. We'll kindly resume our seats. Now, since last year, if you've been in practice, you realize that the nature of practice following him or her, or if you're in a firm, you have to go to work every single day. But due to the COVID-19 pandemic, realize that things had to take a turn. Some law firms work virtually, some have to take shifts. You have to go to court in mask. You would try to minimize your contact with your witnesses because you don't know where they have been. Clearly, our legal practice has taken a different turn in the face of the pandemic. But the question is, to what extent can we lawyers adapt or acclimatize to this change we have here? We have put together a list of some experts in practice who are going to discuss the legal practice in times of a pandemic. And ladies and gentlemen, please join me as I invite to the podium, I invite to the stage, Mr. Bobby Bansuguba and Mr. Reginald Odoy. And they have to discuss the legal practice in times of pandemic. As I said, it's not been easy going to court in a mask, and especially if you have to go to the High Court, sometimes to climb to the topmost floor when the elevator is not working in mask, with your books, with a gown, with a wig. You realize it's not an easy task. But I know these experts will do a very good job in dissecting it. So to Mr. Reginald Odoy, over to you. Sorry? Sure, I mean, yes.
Thank you very much. I believe it has already been an insightful conference so far. Madashin, and without wasting my time, permit me to dispense with their profile, and we'll make that available after the program. But just to introduce who we have with us, first of all, we have Mr. Bobby Banson, Smith Law Group. Let us give him a round of applause. Secondly, we have already met Miss Isabel Boateng, who is the managing partner for AB and David Africa. Another round of applause. And lastly, we have also with Atuguba and Associates. Another round of applause for Mr. Harold Atuguba. So we will be having an interesting discussion on the legal practice in times of the pandemic. And we want to thank UPSA for this opportunity. I think as law students and also practitioners, the pandemic sought to change the dynamics in the legal profession, which has been seen as a very conservative industry. Now, the pandemic, close to 2 years now, has come to change how things have been in the legal industry. So first of all, I want to take, on a lighter note, from Mr. Bobby Banson. I mean, almost 2 years ago, you just closed from work, and the next day, things had changed. I want to know what were your sentiments and what fears did you have as a thought leader and a leader in the legal industry? running your own legal practice?
Good morning, and thanks for practitioners. My very friend and adversary, Harold, running battles in court, but friends at every point in time. I think that like everybody, it's from the beginning, we didn't know how far it will go and when it will end. And so planning beyond a day was difficult, especially with government interventions, as it were. And so when it started, you would only hear stories of, okay, they will close the airport, they will close their courts, people can't travel in, you can't go to Registrar General to follow up on works, you can't deal with regulatory agencies. And so as to why things ought not to be done, it became a challenge, especially when particularly with practice in the court processes. There were no directions on the timelines, whether they will be suspended because of the COVID. And so, for instance, if you had been served with a writ and you had to enter appearance within 8 days, 3 days after you were served with a writ, there was a public announcement backed by the EI that nobody should move out. You didn't know whether the provisions in CI 47 are overtaken by the EI issued by the government, and so whether you still could have to wait to enter appearance or wait, because in as much as the executive had issued that EI that we should not go anywhere, you still had some official uncertainties, and it made it difficult initially to plan beyond a week, especially with the working space, whether you should come to office, you should work from home, how effective it would be, whether people even understood that being at home does not mean that you're on holiday, you're on vacation, you still had to work. And so in that light, it was very, very uncertain for the initial period.
Okay, Mr. Harold Atuguba, I mean, just a follow-up to that. I know you are someone who really loves to be in court every day to showcase your advocacy skills. On your part too, what were your sentiments after just knowing that you just woke up and things are changing? And I'm sure you have those fears, or how is the legal practice going to be for me? And am I going to be out of business, or what's going to happen? We want to get your take on that.
Thank you very much. I think what basically happened when the pandemic hit was that everyone was taken aback. No one planned for that contingency. And so the overriding thing was, could we continue to operate like we did prior to the pandemic? But it didn't take long for all of us to realize to adapt to what was emerging. Now, it was particularly daunting because you're talking a legal profession that is not too amenable to change, especially when it has to do with technology. And it had become clear that technology was then going to drive how we do things. But here you had a profession that was steeped in the pen-quell system and not too adaptive to using technology to drive the way. So in that sense, it was initially very challenging. And so we had to draw deep on our individual firms' planning, in the past can come in handy. And I'll give you an example. So with international clients, we had a model where we restricted our meetings with them to virtual sessions. And this was done to ensure that we had value for time. And so when the pandemic hit and it became clear that we would then be having virtual sessions, all we had to do as a firm was to then scale up those sessions on a broader scale. So, and it, because it was clear that even with internal clients now, you would have to be using more of the virtual sessions, to get work done. And finally, you see lawyers all over the place going to court with very old files, some of which are older than the practitioners. And it's always been very difficult to have a digital system of storing all these material, to have a technological system where you could easily access all these files. Luckily for us at the firm, even before the pandemic, we had what we called the electronic retrieval system, where all client files were stored. And so it became relatively easier for lawyers to work remotely from home. So this is just about how we
to have your take on that. AB and David Africa is one of the largest law firms in Ghana, and you have also shown your commitment to training. So I also want to have an understanding of how did that change your view of running your law firm, especially in terms of how effective legal training was going to be in your firm.
When the pandemic hit, I think that there was a cycle. The initial one where we were all taken aback because nobody anticipated that the pandemic would be that close. So there was that initial, shock. Then you went into a certain spectrum where, you had gotten acclimatized, not acclimatized in terms of you were accepting it, but somehow you got in a sense of what the pandemic was about and what was intended to be in the future. Then you've come to that tapering off, which we are all in right now. But at the paramount, and not just their health and safety, their bottom line, in terms of how are we going to be able to keep our people and ensure that in a pandemic where people need their financial resources, we're not going to be a problem. So our first thinking was health and safety. That meant everybody had to go home because health and safety was paramount. And for us, health and safety was not only about physical safety, about not catching the virus, but also mental safety, mental health, because it was a key issue when the pandemic hit. The fear, we were really, really scared. So health and safety was important. Then we had to make a very quick decision. Do we quickly start thinking about cutting costs? What do we do in terms of our staff? Do we keep everybody on? Or do we start thinking about a 50% salary or 75% salary? So those were the immediate things that happened to us. But for us, the immediate thing was our people and their well-being. And that was paramount at the beginning.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have an array of law firms represented here with diverse practice areas. So, Madam Isabel, I want to start with you again. Which areas of your practice, with practical examples, were negatively affected, what it brought on your practice, and how have you overcome it? Because there are some law firms and industries represented here that are still trying to find ways to overcome these challenges. And for the students that are gathered here to looking at the future of the profession, they are thinking about what is the profession going to offer me? So we want to know what steps you took to address these negative challenges.
What was very helpful for us, and I think one of the things that I will encourage all law firms, if you don't have it in place, is a business continuity plan. A business continuity plan is a sort of a crisis management plan that lets you think ahead of what you will do when crisis hits. So that when the crisis actually happens, you're not in panic mode. But the business continuity plan sets out what you need to do. So for us, we had that in place. It's part of our Lexel requirements. So we now said, what does our business continuity plan say we should do in terms of a pandemic? That was very useful in keeping us calmer in terms of what our reaction, our responses to the situation was. In terms of practice, amazingly, and I must say amazing, and that's to the glory of God, we didn't see a dip in terms of scope of work or work generation as we had expected. And sometimes I think to myself, I tell my senior partner, it's because we never cut anybody off. And God was, giving us blessings as a result of that. But you compensated by other areas. You find, for example, when it came to loan and security documentation, when it came to financing arrangements, there was a dip, clearly, because the market was uncertain. So you didn't want to have lenders were not really particularly excited about funding projects. So there was a dip there. Then when it came to intellectual property in particular, of course, I think that the momentum for innovation had just suddenly dipped. Nobody was really excited about registering trademarks, about patents, etc. So that also, there was a dip in that to think, what do I do should I become insolvent? What are the options for a company that has become insolvent? And it was also helpful at the time we had the corporate insolvency and restructuring bill that had been passed, because it provided clearer guidelines as to what you do when a company becomes insolvent. And it's very key that we had the rules around, restructuring, the restructuring agreements, and you found that a lot of your clientele were asking you, what do we do? So you had to be in that space where you're able to provide that kind of advice. Then also, you also found that when it came to natural resources, especially in oil and gas, things were still going on. So there was still a lot of work in that area of our practice. So, some balances here and there, but all in all, it worked out.
Okay. Mr. Bobby Banson, just in relation to that question, students here, in the law school setting, we are made to believe that much of what the legal industry offers us is going to court and all that. So we want to know that what is the scope of you, so that you are not out of business, and more so you are adapting and innovating to meet the needs of the time.
Well, I associate a lot with what Senior Isabel said earlier on. I think that it depends on the department of the firm and the kind of services that department was providing. For sure, litigation, qualitigation as we know it, suffered some dip in the initial period, because then you were not able to have access to the court as you would expect. You would have to keep telling the clients that, listen, we don't even know the next date because the courts are on break, and so we cannot give you that assurance of when the case would proceed. I also realized that there were, let me just categorize two forms of clients, and I believe that every law firm would have that experience. Clients are people who would want to walk in, this is my lawyer, I have come to see my lawyer. For them, it gives them some satisfaction. And no matter how much you tell them, oh, let's have a Zoom call, let's have a virtual call, they don't understand. Until they see their lawyer, then they don't have satisfaction. And you would have to manage those kind of expectations as well. And so for them, as long as the ban on moving around freely or the restrictions were lifted, they thought they should be able to walk to the lawyer's office and see the lawyer, or should be able to criteria, or that those class of clients who were less sophisticated for the purposes of our discussion and were not used to having laptops and to say that, okay, let's have a virtual meeting. They didn't understand. They want to show you documents and they want to hear you speak before they know that, their problems have been solved. And then you have the sophisticated clients who, even prior to the pandemic, like Harold said, were okay with having virtual meetings. Yes, it is true that, it's the advent of the COVID made these, so we could adapt those means to have those kind of meetings. In terms of the scope of work, I noticed that within that period, especially the first 2-3 months, we had a lot of requests from companies in the hospitality industries to provide them with opinions on the effect of the COVID on their labor contracts. And you realize that it could not be a template matter, because you'd have management level, the kind of agreements they had, then you'd have those below that, then you have the director levels to that kind of arrangement. And so you'd always have to, it's sort of in itself produced another aspect of legal work that hitherto was taken for granted. So whether or not force majeure, the COVID situation was force majeure or was something else, was football clubs locally, whether the contracts with the players, whether the 1 year, the contract should be interpreted to mean a season or a full calendar year. And I think internationally, those who follow football will notice that in the case of Lionel Messi, it became a huge subject, whether or not the contract was for a year, as in the calendar year, or for a season, and the season determined by the local football association. And because of COVID, the season did not end in July as we thought, but was extended. So locally, we had those issues where player, coaches, technical staff, and so the COVID itself generated another aspect of legal services, advantage of that. So it had its ups and downs, and especially when it comes to the kind of work or services that would now be required of you. And fortunately, when you provide those opinions, when you provide that services, it formed the background for future negotiations. So that even after that, now in most contracts in the football field, let me put it that way, you'd see that there are clauses that now define the seasons, when previously it was just left like that. But because of the COVID, it has introduced that awareness so that partakers or participants in that field are now more careful when they want to define what the footballing season is. So it provided an avenue for a lot of legal services as well.
Okay, Mr. Should I say reducing their physical footprint, and they are transitioning to a remote working system. There are some service providers in the legal industry that are still grappling with how best to set up a template that would work. And of course, students here too are also wondering that what is going to happen, because we all want to become lawyers, and we, in one way or the other, have to work in a law firm or a legal industry. But many of these service providers are reducing their physical footprints. I'm aware of a template that seems to be working. We want to know, what are you doing between transitioning from working from home and working physically in the office, and what are the best practices that we can learn from this?
Thank you. I think we've always known that in this global age, we would have to virtually transition from physical working spaces to working virtually. What the pandemic did was just to accelerate the pace at which we did that. And I'll give you a classical example. So for a long time, filing of court processes has always been manual. The judicial processes to be electronically filed. Now, the challenge with that is that you had the pace at which the technological advancement was going at a relatively slower pace than it should have been. So what the pandemic did was actually to give a certificate of urgency to investing in a more robust technological platform, so you can have legal practice still coexist without physically being present. Now, with legal practice, we know that clients want to have a feel with their lawyers, as my colleague alluded to. Now, a client who cannot have a physical feel with his lawyer does not feel totally satisfied. But the reality of our times and in this pandemic is such that the clients must understand that legal practice has moved. There's a paradigm shift from working at our office that helped us immensely, was that we developed a system where we did not want to have lawyers sitting in the law firm at all hours. Because there's always this notion of having a positive correlation between physical presence and productivity. This pandemic taught us that it is a facade. It's not true. You can sit for long hours presently in an office and achieve next to nothing. But you can work virtually and achieve about 80 to 90% of your day's goals. So what we did in the office prior to the pandemic was to ensure that lawyers were left to come to the office on a rotational basis. So no one was being coerced to come and sit in the office for long hours, but all the lawyers knew that if you needed to be in the office, law. So for instance, we have a transactional team that does mainly transactional work. So all those lawyers in the transactional team are aware that working on a transactional project does not require their physical presence in the office. So even before the pandemic, this group of lawyers were able to deliver on work assignments without being physically present. And so it was easy for them to transition when the pandemic hit to being able to work like that. Just that for now, it was going to be more sustained and for longer hours. So what we basically did was to ensure that once the pandemic began, all lawyers were not supposed to be in the office at all work times. And at the same time, all we did was to refer walk-in clients to lawyers virtually. So we put just one reception assistant at the front desk, and once a client walked in, he was referred to a lawyer, and a Zoom session was organized. And we're not too, unfamiliar with this way of working because, like I pointed out earlier, we already did this for the bulk of our international clients. And so all lawyers in the firm were familiar with this system of working. And for our Tamale office, we deployed the same approach. And so any client who walked in was able to have a teleconference with a lawyer. And what we realized was that it was able to give us a lot of value for money, because it's not all the time that you physically meet a client that gives you value for money. And so we're able to take about 60% of potential dead weight out of the firm by just virtualizing all our sessions with the clients.
Okay, thank you very much for that delivery. Ms. Isabel, in relation to that question, we still want to know, the pandemic has taught us that there is a modernized way of legal service delivery. And we are speaking about technology, technology, technology. So what has AB and David done? And what is AB and David doing that other law firms or industries can learn from? And also that students here can also feel safe that their position in the future is still guaranteed. So what has AB and David done to embrace technology and fuse it with the legal service delivery?
Okay, so I think that there were two aspects that for us were pertinent. When the pandemic hit and there was restriction on movement, there was a certain stance that the firm took where we were working from home remotely fully. Because really there was nothing else that anybody could do. We had to work from home remotely fully. But you will find that when that was the situation, the output, you also have to make sure performance management is a key thing. As much as you will talk about working remotely, as much as we're talking about embracing a new way of doing things, there are key things that as a law firm we have to be mindful of. That was performance management, performance monitoring, quality of the service, and ensuring at the same time that our staff were healthy and they didn't have any health issues. So in the beginning, yes, we worked remotely, but as the pandemic tapered off a bit, we decided that we needed to start coming into the office a little bit at a time. So we started a shift system. So a shift system that looked at our current capacity, how many people were in an office in a particular time, so that you could ensure there was proper social distancing and people could work and their health was not at risk. As we have moved on, we have, for example, abolished our shift system. But we've given the option to those who want to work remotely to do so, whilst ensuring social distancing within the office. Now, the reason why we're doing that is that this is a new way of doing things, a new world order. We cannot be kept under the cloak of a pandemic forever, in which case we say that because of people's health, etc., we have to work remotely only. We have also embraced technology. We are using the Zooms, the Microsoft Teams, all of those online platforms. As Bobby said, all of these things existed before. It was just that what COVID did was sort of like catapult us into the future, and we're forced, and lawyers are very, very resistant to change. We had we had no option but to embrace that change. But what I'm saying is that whilst we are recognizing that, we're recognizing the importance of technology, we are also matching it against the need for performance management. We are benchmarking it against the fact that we need to generate income. And whilst all of these online virtual platforms help us to still, provide legal work for our clients and still generate income, there's a certain part of it that we all have to be very careful about. That is performance management. Because the truth is that unless you put in a certain system where you can closely monitor the performance of your staff, sometimes some people are supposed to be working from home, and the reality is that they are not. But at the end of the day, you cannot say that because they are working from home, you are not going to pay them a salary. You have to pay them a salary. So you balance all of these elements. Yes, the fact that there's a pandemic is still there, but balance it against the fact that you need to ensure there's a steady revenue income stream so that you can use it to pay they themselves who also have to work. So all of that balancing, sometimes you might find in your law firm, somebody says, one law firm, everybody is working remotely. And there's even the tendency for them to feel that you are being insensitive, that you are saying that come to the office, but of course still giving them the option if they want to work remotely. But working remotely within rules, within clear rules of conduct. Otherwise, you don't assume that human beings will just be up and doing. The human beings, proclivity is to feel free. I mean, let's be frank. But at the same time, you need to balance that. So sometimes your people will say, oh, this law firm, they are working remotely and they are letting us as if you are evil. Yes. But I always have to remind them, we have to balance that against the fact that I need for you to generate income so that I can pay you and have your work secure. Otherwise, what will happen? I may have to cut, staff, and will that be fair to you? So yes, we are balancing all of those things, and it's very important that I think that young people shouldn't just feel that, work remotely. So you go to a law firm, they say they are not working remotely, and you think that they are insensitive. That's not true. Yes.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Bob Banks. We want to get your take on that too. How your firm has modified or is modifying the practice in order to suit the current times, using technology or whatever means that you have identified.
think that in all honesty, the benchmark is still the performance. Because for me or for us, it was an issue of, listen, when it started, we can be home. And at the end of the day, your turnaround time will not be reduced. Because if the client sends a request for legal services, you have told the client that you are still open, you are working. And so you can't say that, oh, because we are working up from the house, if we would have delivered the opinion in 3 days, now we would have to deliver it in 7 days. You can't give that excuse. And so the moment you don't reorient your colleagues for them to understand that working from home does not mean that you're on half vacation. It means that your performance, actually, those who work from home in the proper, or the proper sense of the word will tell you that the performance is more than if they had come to the office. Because if you dedicate yourself that you'll be working from home, the distractions are sometimes less if you have that kind of environment there. So all you have is you and your laptop. But the reverse is equally true. And that persons can say that, okay, I would have, let me give you that an instance. When it started, I was having classes for the law school. The director is not here. Okay. He was on leave then, so. And it was a Zoom class. So you open the Zoom, the students join, and you see on the list, let's say 100 students. And you talk, only you and your laptop. And so you're assuming that everybody is there listening. So you'll be talking. Then after 3 classes, I noticed that some people were asking questions that had been discussed in the previous class. And so I said, okay. So in the course of it, I'll just mention a name randomly. And say, okay, can you just read this portion of the CI 47? And for about 70% of the names that I mentioned, they were not there. Even though their names appeared on the thing, they were absent. And you would have some of their colleagues giving excuses for them. Oh, he just went to the bathroom. Oh, he just stepped out. I said, are you people in the same room? Or you're in the same hostel? So it's the same scenario that translates even when it comes to work. And so you would expect that your colleagues are home working, but the performance may not be the same. And when those excuses are given, it will be very difficult for you to verify. But if you are able to reorient them to accept the fact that the performance is the same or should be the same, then there should be no cause for concern. But where you honestly assess the situation and see that, listen, if we all agree that we should work from home, it will be difficult. Let's have a system where those who feel comfortable that their performance would be the same if they are home can stay home and work. Those who think that they need to be in the office for their performance to be spot on should stay in the office and work. At the end of the day, man must eat, pandemic or no pandemic. And you must eat because you work. It's not for free. And so if you think that working from home would reduce your ability to perform and your earning capacity, you should make that decision individually. Because when you kill the elephant, those who kill it are the ones who contribute, who enjoy the meat. So if you are not performing well to contribute to the killing, nobody should go to the forest and kill and bring to you. Remember, we had Ebola. It wasn't on this same scale. But I recall at the height of the Ebola, there was a transaction that had to be done in Abuja. And in my office, everybody was scared to go because they said Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Liberia had Ebola. Ghana had not recorded any case then. So it's like, who would go? Would you go and catch it and come back? But the people who went, they came back without Ebola. And they had, the meat. And so you would have to make that individual assessment. And if the firm provides you that option, I believe that you should make that assessment to choose whether to work from home and your performance you think will be less, you earn less, or you come to the office, up your performance, and the reverse is true.
Okay, thank you very much. I think one thing that we have gathered here is that a major aspect of the legal industry is that the legal industry is a business. The legal industry is a business. But for this being a mentorship program, we are also concerned with the mentorship aspect, the training, what we will get. So on the other hand, or on the flip side, we want to ask the question, and Mr. Harold Atuba, I'll take the first response from you, that since it is all about the benchmark is all about measuring performance and all that. A mentee here or a student here is also concerned about how will I be trained? Looking at the dynamics now where there's either work from home or whatever. And the question is, okay, yes, I'm working, I need to be paid and all that, but I also came here for a certain level or degree of training. So how can we adapt a training system, or what training system have you adapted which would fit in line with the practice dynamics of the time? I want to get your view on that.
Thank you. So I think what has helped us is that for every young lawyer who walks into Atugba and Associates, at least if you've worked with Professor Tuguba before, you would know, or if he's taught you in the past or still teaching you now, you know one intrinsic quality about him is that he takes mentorship of young lawyers very seriously. And so the pandemic is certainly no excuse for us as a firm not investing in young lawyers. And so it is one of the most treasured things at the firm. What we've done over the years is that aside the regular orientation we give to young lawyers, we don't put the same amount of pressure on young lawyers as we do on associates. And the reason is simple. You can easily, in this very ultra-competitive profession, dim the lights of a young lawyer for good. And the old practice of trying to be, quote and unquote, very hard on young lawyers hasn't worked for everybody because people are different, people learn differently, people have different mood swings, and it's a template of bringing out the best in a young lawyer that works. And so what we do is that every young lawyer at the firm is taken through a system of training where you immediately know that this is the final product you should come out with if you are assigned a task. We give you precedents to help you in that regard. Now, after your first assignment draft has been sent to the most immediate associate and is reviewed and you have your comments, what we do is you have an in-person meeting with that senior to draw your attention to the places you could have done better and how you need to make your subsequent drafts reach the firm's standard. And what we have done over the years is we have invited not only partners, but external resource persons. I'll give you a small example. The last person to have honored our invitation was Senior A. Sankoma, who was invited to come and take young lawyers at the firm through how his practice at Benti Enchi has developed over the years. Since my senior Isabel is here, I'm sure she would be the next who would be extending such an invitation to. So what we do at the firm is to make sure that you do not go through only the internal training that has been designed at the firm to benefit, but we make sure that external law practices that have things young lawyers can learn from, established practitioners, are able to come on sessions on chosen topics, and these are delivered. And we have a mentorship program in the firm where we assign each young lawyer to a partner and an associate. So you work closely with that associate and the partner, and you have a varied system of how you go about legal practice. We don't only end it there because we realize legal practice is just a small component of your well-being as a human being. And so for you to be a